Chelsea Castle is the content lead at Lavender, an email intelligence platform that's on a mission to change the way that sales folk engage and add value to their prospects. And arguably, they do it in one of the most fun and engaging ways I've seen in the SaaS world to date. In this episode of Making Mixtapes, Chelsea sits down to talk all about her approach and Lavender's approach to content creation, social media, editorial content, and much more. She lifts the hood on the philosophy around their fun yet incredibly engaging content. Sure, they stand out, but not for the sake of standing out. And you're gonna wanna stick to the end for this one. While we get into the technical elements of what makes their content so great, Chelsea leaves us with a lens that we can look through when producing and distributing our content. One that's profound and applicable no matter what industry you're in. Enjoy. Chelsea, thank you very much for joining me. I was having a little peek at your LinkedIn earlier, and I noticed that, like so many of the guests that I've had on this podcast, before you got into content marketing, you got your start in journalism. Could you tell me a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me, Tom. Looking forward to our conversation. So 10 plus years ago, I started in journalism, and I studied journalism in school. I worked for a newspaper. I worked for magazines. I was actually the editor-in-chief of a couple magazines for a few years. And I always knew I didn't want to be pigeonholed into that one discipline. Journalism at the time was also very different then than it is now. This was pre-2016. So the world and the state of journalism was very different. But I did that for a while, and I just knew I wanted to do something a little different and just wanted to flex kind of my skill set elsewhere. So I moved into the agency world. I worked at a marketing and marketing and branding agency for a few years. And then I kind of moved into tech. So journalism, I think, is still the root of everything. I don't necessarily think of myself as a former journalist because I think a lot of those skills are kind of still present in my day-to-day as a content marketer.
Yeah, fascinating. How do you feel that it set you up for the world of content marketing, as it were? Do you feel like there's any specific skills or even soft skills that make you a better content marketer?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it too, as soft skills. I think a lot of journalistic fundamentals and principles that apply to content marketing, I think, can be learned. I think a lot of it has to do with, if I kind of go through it as bullet points, you learn very well how to structure content in a way that captivates your reader. One of the first things you learn in journalism is readers are inherently selfish. And I think we can all probably relate to this, is our time is one of our most valuable currencies. So when you're going to read something, you're kind of always asking, so what? What is in this for me? Why should I care? Why should I read? Same thing for video. Like, why should I consume this thing? Why should I take my time and consume it? So you learn a lot about how to compel your reader to actually read what you wrote. And then also, how do you take that a step further and say, here's why you should be moved. Like, well, here's what's interesting about the story we have to tell. So a lot of those fundamentals are important in content marketing because you're trying to compel your audience to know who you are, learn who you are, remember who you are, eventually buy your product. So a lot of those fundamentals are really critical to successful content marketing. I'd say a few other things are you learn a lot about proper interviewing, which can be really helpful. You're typically not the subject matter expert as a journalist when you go to write something. So that can also be really advantageous. I have been marketing to sellers for several years across my former role at Chili Piper and my current role at Lavender. I am not a salesperson. My only sales background is when I worked at a bike shop and sold bikes. So having that journalistic mindset helps me learn a subject matter as much as I can so that I can write about it in a way that's effective.
I find that everyone who fell into marketing had some really odd job that stands out, whether that's bikes for you. It was gourmet food and Danish food for me at the very beginning. We all have an odd one. You mentioned something a second ago in terms of telling a story. You're not the subject matter expert. You're kind of talking to individuals. How do you see that apply to the world of B2B content marketing these days in your role, but specifically, I guess, at Lavender?
And that's interesting because marketing, especially today, and selling, it's a lot about trust. As humans, we're wired for connection. So that's one thing I think a lot about content is how do I build trust when I am not typically like, some people know that I'm not the voice of authority on whatever it is that I'm writing about in my role at Lavender. Some people do, some people don't. So a lot of it for me is thinking about that connection and trust that you can build with your audience. And when I say audience, that can be fans, customers, former customers, people who may never use your product but know who you are, people who learn who you are and hopefully might buy your product or share your name in the future, and people who are like new to you. So I think a lot about serving your audience and building that connection and trust through the lens of being a subject matter expert and also leaning on internal SMEs, right? So I'm very lucky, and I think Lavender is unique in that we've kind of built our presence up until now, creating a lot of organic content that has been very successful. So I have the advantage of learning from that, turning all of that content on rented spaces like a LinkedIn into owned spaces. So I'm learning a lot as I go, and then I can lean a lot internally from our internal SMEs to really make sure that I'm being as helpful as possible and building that trust as a subject matter expert.
Absolutely. Building the trust, especially when, like you said, some people see you as an expert and some don't. Is that how you positioned it just a second ago? Yeah, I think building that trust as a content marketer in the B2B world is key. I want to explore your approach to editorial content at Lavender shortly, but I find, and a lot of my listeners from what I've told, find that career journeys like yours are very fascinating because we've started with journalism, but you ended up before, jumping into the startup world as a director of content at Chili Piper. How do you feel that your track record in journalism, working at agencies, and all that jazz prepared you for the world of leadership, shall we say?
Yeah, it's a good question. Since I left college, I've always led teams. It's just kind of been a happenstance for me. When I was in the magazine world, I built a team of freelancers and internal individuals to help create the magazine on a weekly basis. And ever since then, I've been leading either interns or teams or building teams. So it's kind of been just like what's happened to me in my career, not always by choosing. But every job that I've had, I've been lucky to acquire a really wide array of skills. And some people, it's a really fun conversation. I think a debate around, is it best or more effective to kind of be focused on one discipline or spread across multiple disciplines? And that's really why we're here today with this conversation. That could be a whole other episode.
I was going to ask,
but
what do you think, if you were to put it in a nutshell, is the best approach, right? The specific discipline or the jack of all trades without cheapening it, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a contentious conversation for a reason, and also a fun one to have. I think I honestly go back and forth. I think it depends on the person and the day. For me, my personal goal is to be as effective as possible. So when I went to Chili Piper, I had such an array of experiences where when you're in a startup, there's often a lot of gaps to be filled, problems to be solved. And I was able to focus on using my skills across the marketing team. So while I was executing, I was an IC, but then also I built the team and I was executing at the same time. A lot of my background enabled me to set up processes and set up systems for both the content team and the marketing team, as we were still pretty new. I joined in 2019. And the marketing team at Chili Piper had just started earlier that year. So still in the very early days of building things. So I was just kind of able to get my hands in and help wherever I could. And I couldn't have done that if I didn't have just a background where I got to learn from a lot of people who were the best of the best at project management and account management and systems and creating those and executing. So, and editors, I worked with some really great editors in the agency world. So I feel kind of like a giant sponge of all of these weird experiences that enable me to just kind of plug in and help where I can.
Yeah, fascinating. What do you think surprised you about jumping into the world of leadership by starting as an individual contributor? Was there anything you weren't quite prepared for that strengthened you or gave you an additional edge as you came out the other end and started into the world of startups?
That's a good question. I had to learn really quickly how to handle difficult situations, especially in the magazine world. I had reporters who were doing things they shouldn't do to kind of like important figures in the community, or just learning. So they're reporters, they're young reporters, they're learning. And I think this can be applicable to modern day roles in B2B, right? So you have an individual who's still learning and that's not even like not performing. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And then how do you have a conversation like that with like the chief of police or whoever this important person is? So I had to learn really quickly how to communicate to a wide array of individuals and how to then communicate that with the people I was managing them, and doing it in a way that took care of them while also kind of taking care of the brand that I was working for and representing, and then also like right or wrong. So that can be applicable in like a B2B company, and that you have to have difficult conversations sometimes, whether it's to a board or executive leadership and your team. So learning how to have difficult conversations while considering so many different people and points of view and perspectives was a big thing I learned early on.
Yeah. How do you go about having those tricky conversations while managing those expectations, as you've put it? Is there, obviously, we could sit here and talk about this for hours, but do you feel like there's a kind of mindset before jumping into it?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be difficult. It wouldn't be difficult for no reason. It's a good question. I think it has a lot to do with kind of always taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. And you communicate it differently to different parties, right? So what I say to my CEO in that example versus the chief of police versus my reporter will be different things. I'm a big believer in the radical candor methodology, which is around caring personally while challenging directly. So in that very specific example, I kind of stood up for my reporter in some ways, but then acknowledged the concerns that the chief of police in that very specific example shared. So it's a lot of like acknowledgement, empathy, trying to understand the other person's situation, and where they're coming from. I think perspective is really, we all have different beliefs and experiences that make up our perspective. So those conversations, in terms of like a mindset, I think a good mindset to approach is like being empathetic to all parties, and also understanding that sometimes you'll have to disagree and commit to move forward in whatever that looks like from a problem solving capacity.
Great answer. Great answer. Radical Candor is sitting on my Kindle at the moment unread. So thank you for the reminder as well. You've obviously gone from, this leadership role at a really fast growing B2B company back into the world of, startups. Are you creating a lot of the content there yourself at the moment?
I am. So this is the first role I think I've had in a long time where I'm not leading a team. I'm just executing and kind of focusing on strategy. It's really nice, actually. I am a people leader at heart. I love leading teams, growing teams, taking care of people, helping them grow. I'm still good friends today with a lot of the people that I've led in the past, or got, I'm a big believer in like this player coach mentality. So even saying led is weird. But yeah, so now just being able to focus on strategy and execute, it's pretty nice.
Yeah. It sounds like you get the best of both worlds. And I feel like Lavender, I'm a bit of a Lavender fanboy, as the team here at Grizzle is very aware of. I feel like it's one of the most fascinating and fun B2B brands we've seen in a while. How do you and the team kind of stay so creative while maintaining this cadence of content that you've got coming out, especially as you're all creating it yourselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if there's a clear how. We honestly just have a lot of fun, keep each other going. We don't necessarily have like a strict content calendar, at least right now, that we're trying to hit. For context, the marketing team just joined Lavender in January of this year. So we definitely have ebbs and flows of where we're, I guess, more creative, less creative, but a lot of it just has to do with we're highly collaborative. It's a very flat team from a marketing perspective and also from an org perspective. So one thing that the team, other people say this, not me, so I feel like I can adopt it, and that they've really built the co-founders have consciously built a team of top performers. So everyone is really like the best of the best. Even the engineering team is structured that way. So we're all high achievers, top performers, however you want to slice and dice it. And I think just like the very careful mixing of individuals that they've created. Like we just love riffing, having fun, genuinely like love each other, which is probably like a whole other tangent I won't go down, but we just have a lot of fun and we care a lot about what we do. So the co-founders are really good about rallying us around this mission of not just being user focused and user first, which we are, of course, but also the mentality around helping and genuinely serving our audience and kind of zagging. So when everyone else is zigging, we want to zag is how our CEO, Will Balance, refers to it. So we have a lot of fun leaning into that, doing things different. And that can really get kind of like your juices flowing where you're able to take inspiration from everything, B2C and streaming services, and just take inspiration from the world and then think about how we can apply that through our strategic lens of serving our users.
Yeah, I love that. I saw a clip of a podcast with I think it's the head of media content at Zoom Info earlier, actually. And it was a very short clip, but what he said were two things. First of all, is that it has to be fun. And part of that is the reason that they publish like so much video content in any given week. But he also said that, having a process where you're ideating, executing, and getting out the door as quickly as possible is key too. Do you guys have, stepping into the world of content operations now, do you have, kind of like a pipeline or a process when it's like, you've got an idea, you get it done, you get it out the door quickly?
Yeah, I think we do kind of exactly what you just outlined across all mediums. So we've got several people working on different types of video. I stay focused primarily on written content, but we're also always keen to keep the loops back and forth. So how can I turn this video into something that's written? How can this article that I wrote turn into a video? And then we just kind of go and do it. We just kind of execute. So bias to action, leaning into also like what we're hearing from the audience. So if one particular piece of content is doing really well, how can we repurpose that, turn that into something else, do another iteration or version 2. So yeah, we're very much just kind of continuing to go and just do more faster as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about your editorial content in a second, but I've noticed as well, so on the topic of media, video content, your YouTube content seems to get a tidy amount of engagement, especially for a quote-unquote B2B brand. How are those going for you at the moment in terms of, organic growth and engagement and all that good stuff?
Yeah, the organic growth on YouTube is pretty cool. We shout out to Will Aiken and Raina for that. I'm sure everyone listening probably knows Will Aiken.
Yes. Could you, for anyone who doesn't know,
I'll do a quick intro.
Who's Will and who was the other individual you mentioned?
Raina, she is our video editor. So Will is, I think, historically known as a sales content creator, influencer. He was previously at SalesFeed. He is our de facto social media manager, but he also creates all of our videos, runs YouTube. So shout out to him for really growing that channel and our subscribers, like you mentioned, engagement. I think he approaches it like you would on TikTok. So like our TikTok as well is does pretty well compared to, or as similarly to YouTube. And Raina,
I feel too old for TikTok, but I'm going to have a peek. I'm going to have a peek afterwards for research purposes.
Yeah, you should have a peek. I'm not on TikTok either, but I'll just peek on there every once in a while. And they put out some great stuff. So a lot of it has to do with, I think, like their approach, leaning into being human, which I think is another core element of the Lavender brand that we all apply in our content. And then Raina, actually, Will found her on TikTok, funnily enough, and she is just this phenomenal Gen Z video editor who can also just do a million creative things. So their powers combined are pretty awesome.
Yeah. That reminds me of I guess it's not a methodology, but I guess more of a philosophy that a lot of people, Lavender and you guys being one of them, Obed from Hockey Stack, kind of talking about the creator-led approach to content marketing in the B2B world. What better place than getting and finding other creators and editors in TikTok, right?
Yep. It was honestly our approach too. I'll give another shout out to my other team member, Todd Klauser, who formerly at Refine Labs. And that was kind of his mentality too, in coming into Lavender, of building what we have now as Lavender Land, which is our own streaming service. free streaming service, and the whole idea of elevating internal and external content creators. And again, is all kind of going back to serving our audience in a way that's educational and helpful and different.
Yeah, amazing. Speaking of Lavender Land, so it's this kind of Netflix-esque approach to content, right? I see Lavender, Zora, Hockey Stack have kind of put their hat on this approach to packaging content. I'm curious to hear how that's going at the moment as well, because I know a lot of traditional B2B marketers will talk about can't quite attribute the ROI of that, but obviously you guys believe in what you're doing. Yeah, how do you find that's impacting the Lavender brand and your goals at the moment?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible actually to and I say this from someone who helps but also is not spearheading it. So I feel like I can be a little more braggy to my teammates about it.
But be as braggy as you like.
Yeah, they've just done a great job creating the content on there. We have a lot of our email frameworks on there as well that people find pretty helpful. But yeah, I mean, it's mentioned in our survey when we ask people about how they hear about us. It's mentioned constantly in conversations. We've had some of our individuals. So Jen Allen, for example, she hosts a series with Will Aiken called Jen versus Will. She's been at conferences and people will walk up to her and say, "Oh my God, it's Jen from Jen versus Will," as if she's a celebrity, which she's a celebrity in her own right, for sure. But the recognizability, the brand building, the brand awareness, and how all of that just kind of funnels back into people. Essentially, the goal is people know you keep them in our ecosystem as much as possible, right? So that when they have a problem we can solve, they know to come to us. And we're definitely seeing that happening.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. Yeah, the things that you can't quite measure, but they totally make an impact. Amazing. Okay, Chelsea, we've cheerleaded the rest of your team. Let's go down to the editorial content side of things right now. Do you feel like that kind of fun tone has informed the way that you write content and maybe perhaps even changed the way that you approached it? This is a loaded question because I've noticed a few things on the blog that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you think. So, I would say that shaping the core Lavender brand has been an ongoing experience. So, that's been part of my role too, is messaging, positioning, and setting those brand standards. Um, and it can be tricky in some ways because as a brand, we are very playful and fun and don't take ourselves too seriously. But we're also an email intelligence company. Data is at the heart of what we do. And we still need to ensure that we're a voice of authority and taken seriously in the regards of being educational. And we're talking about a lot of, I should say, serious things, but with data, we take that very seriously and how we help people with email. So striking that balance can certainly be tricky. So in written content, I try not to be too fun. I will always err on the side of being clear and direct and concise over being too tongue-in-cheek or clever, making sure that every word that I use is serving a purpose and being valuable in that sentence. We'll be cheeky sometimes. Sometimes I'll do that with GIFs so that the content is very clear. But clarity is like one of our top values when it comes to written content. So I'll try to have some fun with it, but my key element with written content is being human and making the reader feel like they can relate to it and like they're hearing it from someone who understands where like their position and where they're coming from.
Yeah, it's so funny the way you describe your written content because I have written here, your editorial style is fun and conversational, yet punchy and full of actionable value. So whatever you're doing is definitely coming
Love
across.
Great review.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the blog is almost the unsung hero of Lavender, especially with all the buzz that social is getting. What is your strategy when it comes to the blog? And yeah, what's its purpose when it comes to, generating visibility and getting results for Lavender? How's it going?
Yeah, it's going really great, honestly. It's kind of crazy. I've never written content in B2B that's received the kind of engagement that ours does. And a lot of that has to do with distribution channels. So again, this is unique to Lavender, but definitely something that anyone, I think, across any stage or type of company can learn from, in that you have to learn where your audience is. And for us, every seller, one of the top tabs in their window is going to be LinkedIn. So historically, that's always worked really well for building Lavender's brand and recognition. We're working on branching out of that. and also moving those people into own spaces like Lavenderland, like our newsletter, like the blog, which will soon be expanded. So what you see of the Lavender blog today is definitely like V1. We're actually working on a new website. So fun little external, I guess, soft launch. That new website is coming, and the blog will be expanded into a giant resource library, the Lavender library, if you will, where what you see with the blog now will kind of be blown up. But all that to say is a lot of our content receives like 8 to 10,000 page views per month. And through GA, of course, we can see GA being Google Analytics, that a lot of that traffic kind of converts into returning users, people continuing consuming the content, and also referencing. This is like a metric that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, returning users to the same piece of content. So our email frameworks, for example, might have 40,000 page views, but half of those are new users. So to me, that's a really big signal that people are finding that piece of content so helpful that they're returning to it thousands of times.
100%. Yeah. Seeing a high amount of returning visitors is one of the nerdiest guilty pleasures I have when it comes to this. So it's really good to hear. Very good to hear indeed. As a one person, content or editorial content shop, shall we say, what do you think are the biggest challenges to doing what you're doing right now?
Oh my goodness. Time management, despite being something I used to, I think, like give myself credit for, just balancing it all is tricky. I'm in a situation right now where I'm managing the new website project, writing all the copy. So the blog is just like a little less lively right now. And that's just like, it is what it is. I've grown here at Lavender being so early stage. One of my favorite parts about my role is that I can, like I mentioned earlier, just kind of filling gaps and wearing a lot of hats. So I'm wearing a ton of hats right now across email marketing and helping with events and all sorts of things. So, so that's like a great part about my job and what I love. But eventually, I'd say in like the next few weeks, I'll be kind of focusing gears back on the content program.
Yeah, amazing. I don't need to ask you any more follow-up questions to that. I think everyone can relate to the lack of time when it comes to these things.
There's never enough time.
In a recent LinkedIn post, you said, people don't only need to understand what you do, they need to retain it. Clarity is hard. Creating lasting impressions is harder. What do you think the secret is to making lasting impressions, at least when it comes to content?
Yeah, thank you for referencing that. That was one of those like shower thoughts I had where it's like, it's one thing to get someone to respond or click through to an ad or respond, like open and read your email, but you have to leave an impression so that they remember you. And yeah, that can be very hard. I think there are a lot of factors to achieving that, of course, but the biggest of which to me is appealing to emotions. So storytelling is a big fundamental part of journalism. And I think it's also one of the most critical ways to be effective in content marketing. I mentioned this earlier and I'll reiterate it because it's a big part of my ethos as a content marketer is we're wired for connection. So if you can make someone feel seen and heard and related to, and then you're giving them something that's helpful, like a framework or a helpful piece of advice that's tangible and tactical and not just fluffy, or not just like everything else that they read, you're more likely to remember that. I can't remember who said this, but there was a quote I heard recently that really stuck with me where you think about your interactions as like a boat and your wake is how those interactions leave people feeling about you. And you're not necessarily looking at the wake because you're not always looking in the rearview mirror. Similar to like the idea of an aftertaste, like people care about why. I think Jim Gaffigan said this next quote actually, where he said, people care about why they laugh. So people care about why they're laughing at your content or how they feel when they consume your content. So I think a lot about that. And I think it can sound simple, but it can be hard to achieve. It's like, how do you want the person to feel when they're consuming your video or written piece or whatever it might be? And when you consider that, that doesn't always mean that you'll hit the nail on the head. Of course, with achieving that, everyone's different. Every person who's consuming your content will be coming from different perspectives. But when you consider the aftertaste or the wake of your interactions and you're thoughtful about it and strategic and just iterating, and a lot of it is practice, I think, as well. I think that can be really impactful at achieving that lasting impression in someone's mind.
Yeah, that wake analogy is a really good one. And it's almost meta, like how people think about how something made them feel rather than the thing itself. I've never heard it put that way before. And I reckon that's a great place to end. That was an incredible answer. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, what are you working on right now that you're most jazzed about?
Oh, I don't know if I can share, Tom.
Oh man, all right.
I dropped the website. I think that's a really big teaser. That's a really big project for us. I think it's going to get a lot of noise in traditional fashion, lavender fashion. It'll be quite the zag. So, and that's taking up all my time is the website. So I will drop that as a little nugget for the audience to check back lavender.ai soon. And I'm working on that these days.
Okay, noted. I think whatever it is you're keeping under wraps, we'll know it when we see it.
100%.
And finally, where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, thank you. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. All my handles are just my name, Chelsea Castle.
We'll include links in the show notes as well. Chelsea, thank you so much for spending the time to talk about all things lavender and journalism today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tom.